Welcome, I'm the White Reaper. Here in this dark corner of YouTube, we explore tales of horror that defy reason, paranormal stories that will chill the blood, and mysteries you'd rather not solve. Because who hasn't felt that chill when they hear a creak in the hallway or see a figure in the corner of their room? Well, I don't just tell stories, we live them. Each video is a door to the unknown, a journey into the depths of your fears. And you, dear community, are an essential part of this journey. Your comments, your theories, and your own experiences are what make this channel unique and alive. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any story. Thank you for being part of this community. Now, turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and get ready, because the night has only just begun. The rain beat mercilessly on the cobblestones of Valle Sombrio, a small forgotten village in the heart of Castile, where time seemed to have stopped in an eternal twilight. The night mist embraced every corner, transforming the alleys into endless passages, where the dim light of the street lamps could hardly reveal the secrets buried behind cracked walls. In this scenario of gloom and memories, real events and urban legends were intertwined, where the horror did not reside in the supernatural, but in the fragility and corruption of the human mind. Raul Mendizabal, a middle-aged journalist scarred by the loss of his sister in an unexplained accident, had come to Shadow Valley in search of answers. For years, he had investigated a series of forgotten crimes, buried in dusty files and testimonies full of contradictions, which spoke of missing family, of whispers in the night, and of a psychological manipulation as subtle as it was devastating. Inspired by true events that occurred in the 70s, Raul had become obsessed with the case of the Mansion of Laments, a former residence that, according to few who dared to mention it, had been the epicenter of unspeakable atrocities. The mansion, located on the outskirts of the town, stood like a macabre monument to decadence. Surrounded by twisted cypress trees and neglected gardens, its stone walls had witnessed a dark history, plagued by betrayals, abuse, and relentless psychological control exercised by Don Ernesto Villalba, a man whose cruelty had left indelible scars on the community. Villalba, influenced by distorted theories and an obsession with moral perfection, was said to have subjected his relatives to a regime of psychological terror, where manipulation and fear were intertwined to break any hint of resistance. Raul's research began in the town's library, a dusty building filled with old volumes that seemed to whisper forgotten secrets. There, among chronicles and yellowed newspaper clippings, he found the first clues, testimonies of neighbors who, still trembling at the memory, spoke of dark rites and an oppressive atmosphere that took over the mansion during the nights of the new moon. An old woman, with bloodshot eyes and a trembling voice, had confessed in a live interview that the walls of that house kept the echo of the screams, the lament of souls who never found peace. Although his words bordered on the supernatural, Raul knew that behind them were hidden facts as crude as a hammering of rain against glass. Driven by a mixture of skepticism and obsession, Raul set out on the road to the mansion. When he arrived, he found an imposing structure, devoid of life, whose broken windows looked like empty eyes that watched with implacable judgment. Every step he took over the matted grass and worn steps echoed in the stillness of the night, like a reminder that he was about to enter territory where reality was distorted into a tangible nightmare. Inside the mansion, the air was heavy, permeated with humidity and a smell of mold and decay that seemed to merge with the resentment of an unspeakable past. Raul turned on his flashlight and walked slowly down a corridor where dusty pictures of stern faces seemed to follow him with accusing glances. Each image evoked stories of pain and submission, fragments of lives that had been shattered by the tyranny of man who believed he owned not only a fortune, but the souls of his lineage. In one of the rooms, he found an abandoned desk, covered in dust and with a series of documents scattered that recounted Villalba's methods with disturbing precision. The text, written in rigid and almost mechanical handwriting, described psychological re-education sessions in which family members were exposed to constant humiliation cut off from reality, and forced to accept the twisted truth imposed by the emotional dictator. The words seemed to take on a life of their own, and the atmosphere was filled with palpable tension that put in check the sanity of those who dared to read them. Among those documents, Raoul found a letter addressed to one of Villalba's sons, detailing a purification process that aimed to eradicate all human weakness. The letter was a testament to a sick mind, capable of transforming love into manipulation, protection into torture. As he read, a shiver ran down his spine, and for an instant, he felt as if someone or something was watching his every move from the shadows of the room. That night, when he retired to the small inn in the village, the journalist was torn between fascination and terror. The locals looked at him with suspicion. They knew, without saying it openly, that in Shadow Valley there were hidden secrets that could not be forgotten, scars of a past that still beat strongly in every crack of the landscape. The sensation of being watched, of something disturbing slipping into the gloom, accompanied him in every dream, and the line between reality and hallucination became blurred. The following days, Raoul decided to delve into the stories of survivors. He visited Carmen, a woman who had lived in the mansion as a child, and whose memories were as fragmentary as they were painful. In her modest home, full of old photos and worn furniture, Carmen recounted episodes that seemed to be taken from a horror story. My father, my grandfather, we all suffered under Villalba's yoke. He was not a monster of legend. He was a real man of flesh and blood who fed on our fear. His eyes clouded as he recalled the nights when screams mingled with the sound of chains and the feeling of being trapped in a labyrinth of suffering with no way out. Carmen also told him about the psychological transformation they had been subjected to, about how Villalba's absolute control had led many to despair, to commit unthinkable acts in an attempt to free themselves from oppression. The human mind, when broken, fragments into 1,000 unrecognizable pieces. And it is in that fracture where the real horror is hidden, he confessed in a broken voice. The harshness of his testimony plunged Raoul into a disturbing reflection. Did a true terror not lie in what was visible, but in the darkness that was hidden inside the soul? While the journalist was delving into the investigation, strange mishaps began to happen to him. Anonymous notes slipped under the door of his room at the inn, cryptic warnings suggesting that he leave the village and forget what he had discovered. In one of those notes, written with trembling strokes and an almost illegible ink, it read, "There are truths that must not be unearthed. The darkness you seek, Raoul, could devour you." The message resonated with a disturbing echo, and every time he read it, the journalist felt his own sanity teeter on the edge of an abyss. Paranoia began to invade his daily life. In the brief moment of quiet, he convinced himself to see lurking figures in the reflections of the windows, shadows that moved when all should be calm. Even the most everyday sounds, the murmur of the wind through the dry leaves, the rustling of wood in the old houses of the village, were transformed into a symphony of warning, as if the environment itself conspired to remind him of the imminence of a fatal fate. One night, driven by a mixture of determination and desperation, Raoul returned to the mansion alone. This time, the atmosphere seemed even more hostile. Every step he took along the central corridor led him to a state of growing uneasiness, as if the echo of forgotten footsteps were following him closely. The mansion, in its decay, seemed to take on a life of its own, and the walls, scarred by the ravages of time, murmured secrets of treachery and lamentation. Raoul's lantern illuminated a living room in which a huge portrait dominated the wall. It was the image of Don Ernesto Villalba, with a cold and calculating gaze, whose eyes seemed to pierce him, judge him, and, in a way, challenge him to discover the truth hidden in every corner. While inspecting the room, he discovered a compartment hidden behind a bookshelf. There lay several diaries and letters, written with meticulous precision, detailing the psychological experiments Villalba had conducted on his own family. One of the diaries belonged to her daughter, Lucia, who had been subjected to a process of re-education so brutal that her words reflected the absolute horror of having been stripped of her individuality. Lucia described endless nights in which she was forced to repeat mantras of obedience in a kind of perverse ritual that sought to erase her identity and replace it with that of her father. The anguish in every word, the latent despair in every line, were testimony to abuse and psychological manipulation taken to the extreme. As Roll read, the narrative became almost unbearable. Each page was a reminder of how the human mind could be molded into an instrument of terror, a sharp weapon in the hands of a tyrant. The coldness with which the methods were described, the precision of the details, showed that those facts were not the fruit of imagination, but were founded on a crude and heartbreaking reality. The journalist felt that something inside was beginning to break, a morbid empathy with the victims that brought him dangerously close to an abyss from which he might not be able to escape. Roll's obsession led him to investigate the town's judicial archives, where he discovered that the case of the Mansion of Laments had been officially archived years ago, due to the lack of conclusive evidence and pressure from a community that preferred to forget the past. However, among the dusty files, he found testimonies of police officers who had witnessed indescribable scenes. Muffled screams, faces contorted by pain and confusion, and an atmosphere so charged with revulsion that some of them never saw the light of day again with the same innocence. These revelations were mixed with rumors and urban legends that, over the years, had helped forge the sinister reputation of the place. The tension reached its climax when, during a cold early morning, Roll received a phone call. On the other end of the line, a distorted voice told him, "You have opened doors that you should never have knocked. Truth comes at a price, and you'll soon know how much it costs." That threat, so direct and personal, left him paralyzed. Every fiber of her being begged her to flee. But the thirst for justice and the obsession with unveiling the truth were more powerful. That same night, he plucked up the courage and, with Lucia's diary in hand, went into the dark heart of the mansion once more. As he entered the basement, the atmosphere became almost unbreathable. The gloom was so thick that it seemed to swallow up the light, and the silence, broken only by the constant dripping of water, resounded like a mournful echo. In that place, forgotten by time and compassion, Roll found a hidden room where old torture devices and objects that seemed to be silent witnesses of immeasurable suffering were stored. Between them, an old mirror reflected a distorted image of his own face, as if the evil that inhabited that house wanted to claim him. The tension accumulated during his research reached its climax at that precise moment. Raoul, feeling the unbearable pressure of guilt and despair, began to question the reality of what he was experiencing. Was it possible that the horror described in Lucia's diaries had been so intense as to leave indelible psychological scars? Or was it his mind, already worn down by years of obsession and mourning, that had begun to play tricks on him? Uncertainty became his worst enemy, and the line between truth and hallucination blurred to the point that every shadow, every whisper, seemed to carry with it the promise of imminent collapse. At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed in the basement hallway, and Raoul felt fear take hold of him. Reality became inescapable. Someone or something was there, lurking, ready to protect the mansion's dark secrets. With a racing heart, he turned slowly, and in the gloom he made out the silhouette of a figure. He was not a specter, but a man with a face furrowed by anguish, whose eyes, laden with despair, seemed to reflect centuries of torment. The figure, with a trembling voice, uttered, "You shouldn't have gone back. The darkness here does not spare the curious." That encounter, as brief as it was terrifying, marked the turning point in Roll's mind. The figure disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving him alone with his fears and the certainty that he was being dragged toward a fate from which there was no escape. The last shreds of sanity faded as he realized that the true terror was not what dwelt in the shadows of the mansion, but dark human nature. capable of inflicting suffering without remorse, of manipulating and destroying from the depths of the soul. At dawn, after an endless night of anguish, Raoul emerged from the mansion as an unwitting witness to a cursed legacy. The village, which had tried to bury its secrets under layers of oblivion and silence, now appeared as a stage in which the memory of those horrors still pulsed strongly. The investigation became a self-destructive obsession. Each new document, each forgotten testimony, reminded him of the cruelty inherent in psychological manipulation and the fragility of the human mind. The story of the Wailing Mansion, based on true events and corroborated by court records, became an echo that echoed through the streets of Shadow Valley. The survivors, marked by irreparable traumas, kept alive the warning that there are truths that, once discovered, can condemn those who dare to seek them. Raoul, with his broken spirit and a burden of guilt that will haunt him forever, understood that he had opened a door to despair, and that on that threshold hides the true face of horror, that of manipulation and human cruelty. The final days of her investigation were a whirlwind of intense emotions and devastating revelations. Unpublished documents, bitter letters, and half-drawn confessions led him to discover that Don Ernesto Villalba's influence extended beyond the mansion. He had woven a web of complicity in the people's society, where blind obedience and fear had allowed atrocities to go unpunished. The inertia of silence and collective indifference had turned the horror into an open wound in the hearts of the people, a wound that time had not been able to heal. In a final confrontation, Raoul met with Carmen, the woman who had witnessed so much suffering. In a conversation full of resignation and contained fury, she confessed to him, "The real monster is not who, but what is allowed be done." Here, darkness is perpetuated in the soul of each one, in every secret kept and in every glance that avoids the truth. Those words were etched into his memory, reminding him that horror was not an external entity, but an internal shadow that we all carry. As the sun began to timidly peek over the horizon, Raoul left Shadow Valley with the certainty that some stories, however painful, must be told to prevent the cycle of oppression and terror from repeating itself. But the price of truth proved too high. An unrelenting obsession brewed in his mind, a sense of constant paranoia that whispered to him in the dark and kept him a prisoner of his own memories. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Villalba's implacable face. I heard the distorted voice of that figure in the basement, and I felt the weight of all the souls that had been broken under the yoke of fear. The chronicle of the Mansion of Lamentations remained, then, not only as a recounting of verifiable facts, but as a perennial warning. The most chilling horror lies in the capacity of human beings to destroy themselves and others. Psychological manipulation, the use of fear as a weapon, and indifference to suffering are shadows that extend far beyond the walls of an old mansion, invading the daily life of any society that refuses to face its own demons. In the years that followed, as Raoul tried to reconstruct his life among fragments of reality and delirium, the streets of Shadow Valley continued to shelter those who knew too much and preferred silence. The case, shelved and forgotten by the authorities, became an urban myth, a grim reminder that the truth, no matter how devastating, always finds a way to resurface, like an indelible scar on the soul of the people. The story that was born from real events and testimonies of pain is, ultimately, a call to reflection on fragility of the human condition. In a world where the mind can be so easily broken and manipulated, the real threat comes not from fantastical beings or supernatural entities, but from the darkness that each carries within. And so, between whispers and shadows, the truth remains. The story of the Wailing Mansion is a mirror in which our deepest fears are reflected, a reminder that real horror is not a specter that lurks in the night, but the relentless capacity of human cruelty. As Shadow Valley slept, with its old walls and silent alleyways, the echo of those laments was still alive, waiting for the next brave, or doomed soul who would dare look too closely at the dark truth that lies behind the seeming calm of the everyday world.